Front and Center. A focus on important and significant developments affecting the lives of Filipinos, not only in the Philippines, but also those living and working around the world. Join us in Front and Center. Here on Radyo Pilipinas World Service.
Good morning to all of our listeners here on Radyo Pilipinas World Service. Welcome to another edition of Front and Center, where we put very significant issues affecting our country, the Philippines, as our program title says, Front and Center. On behalf of our colleague Jerome Toledo, I'm your host for today, Steph Vicente, joining you all for a 30-minute worth of talk discussing important matters with our government officials, people from the private sector, or even members of the academe. As seen through our video live streaming, you may watch and listen to Front and Center through our official Facebook page. Just search Radyo Pilipinas World Service. The same goes for our official YouTube channel. Meanwhile, we also have an audio live streaming thanks to the Evox PBS receiver app. You may download the said mobile application via Google Play Store if you are using an Android phone, or via App Store if you are using an iPhone. Once you have entered the Evox PBS receiver app, just find the logo or icon of Radyo Pilipinas World Service in order for you to be able to listen live to our programs such as Front and Center. We are also back on shortwave radio starting last December, as Front and Center is part of our English service, which airs from 10 o'clock to 11:30 in the morning Philippine Standard Time. You may listen to us via the following shortwave frequencies: 12.020 MHz, 15.640 MHz, and 17.665 MHz. For today's edition of Front and Center, we are going to talk about the working visit of Philippine President Ferdinand R. Marcos Jr. to the United Arab Emirates, or UAE. It is noted that yesterday, Philippine President Ferdinand R. Marcos Jr. witnessed the historic signing of a free trade agreement, or FTA, between the Philippines and the UAE during his 2-day working visit to Abu Dhabi. Alongside UAE President Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan, President Marcos witnessed the signing and exchange of the Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement, or CEPA, signed on behalf of the Philippines by Philippine Trade and Industry Secretary Maria Cristina Roque at the sidelines of the Abu Dhabi Sustainability Week 2026 summit held at the Abu Dhabi National Exhibition Center. The said Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement is the Philippines' first free trade pact with a Middle Eastern country, marking a milestone in expanding the nation's global trade footprint. The agreement aims to reduce tariffs, enhance market access for goods and services, increase investment flows, and create new opportunities for Filipino professionals and service providers in the UAE. To know more about the impact of this Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement between the Philippines and the UAE, we are now joined via Zoom by Filipino-Canadian economist Dr. Michael Batu. Dr. Batu, welcome to Front and Center. This is Steph Vicente again of Radyo Pilipinas World Service.
Good day to you, Steph, and thanks for having me, and good day to our listeners.
Thank you so much for giving us your time to join us here in Front and Center. Dr. Batu, from an economic standpoint, how significant is the Philippines' first free trade agreement with a Middle Eastern country like the UAE?
It is economically and strategically significant at the same time. So let's start with the economics. It is economically significant because this free trade agreement essentially opens up countries, Philippines and the UAE, to better trade relations. And as you may be aware, the Philippines is one of the fastest growing countries in the world. We have a sizable middle class with a strong demand for goods and services. So definitely, this is an important step in terms of liberalizing economies and opening up to freer trade, which is the trend that we've been seeing for many countries, which essentially is opening up to more trade. Now, from a strategic point of view, when we say strategic, means that we're looking at the very long term. It is a signal that the Philippines is diversifying its trading relations.
Hmm.
As we may be aware, the Philippines' top trading partners include firstly the United States, followed by China, and then our ASEAN neighbors.
Hmm.
Now, as a result of this free trade agreement, it sends a signal to the world that the Philippines is opening up its doors to trade to other countries or other regions, specifically the Middle East. So it's a signal that we are diversifying our trading relations, and of course, diversification is an important strategy in the world that we're operating in, because the current world that we're operating in is there are geopolitical uncertainties. It's like what we saw in the previous weeks, what happened with Venezuela, what's going on in other parts of the world. This creates uncertainties, and diversifying our trading relations would cushion our economy in terms of these shocks. So definitely, yes, from a point of view, economics and strategy, these two are significant as far as this free trade agreement with UAE is concerned, Steph.
Hmm. And preliminary studies suggest Philippine exports to the UAE could increase by over 9%. How meaningful is this projected growth for the overall Philippine economy?
Now, you see, 9% export increase might sound really small. However, it's very important to understand the context here. Because if this 9% increase is driven by, let's say, this free trade agreement, it's actually a meaningful one. It's a meaningful increase. So, why is it meaningful? First, is that a percentage increase in exports directly increases export revenues for the country. So that has impacts downstream into our economy. This leads me to the second point, which is the multiplier effect. An increase in revenue creates multiplier effects in other sectors. So they support, for example, jobs, logistics, packaging, transport, etc. There are downstream effects, multiplier effects. And finally, increase in exports would strengthen our foreign exchange. As what we've been seeing lately is that the peso is relative to the US dollar is weakening.
Hmm.
So an increase in exports would mean a stronger and a stable peso. So definitely, although 9% increase might sound modest, but in terms of its other effects, it actually produces a meaningful effects in other sectors.
Hmm. And of course, we would also like to know, Dr. Batu, which sectors of the. Yes,
So the sectors that will benefit, yes.
yes.
So we put those in terms of the sectors that may experience the benefits over the short term, and over those sectors that could benefit over the long term. Now, over the short term, agriculture and food processing, for example, are the ones that might likely have the immediate benefits. And the reason is because of how these sectors produce,
Hmm.
meaning that in the case of agriculture and food processing, a lot of the infrastructure is already there in the Philippines. So what it means is that all the sellers, the businesses are looking for is a market. And once the market is there, then they can sell. So for agriculture and for food processing, even if we include electronics and light manufacturing, because the infrastructure is already there, over the short term, too, they can benefit. Over the long term, okay, once tariffs start to fall, other sectors where it might take a while for them to scale up production so that they can meet the export demand would be sectors like healthcare, education, and other professional services, digital trade, logistics. Later on, these sectors can catch up once the scale is there. But over the short term, what I can say with somewhat certainty, because the infrastructure already exists, would be primarily for agriculture and food processing and electronics. So definitely, yes, there are sectors that are going to benefit. However, in terms of as to when they would experience the benefit, we would see some differences depending on how ready these sectors are in terms of opening up to trade.
Mm. And yes. And speaking of agricultural products and electronics, how could increased exports from those sectors affect domestic production, jobs, and farmer incomes?
Well, higher exports mean higher demand for products, goods, and services produced in the Philippines and that will be exported. So for the case of agriculture, that would directly translates to improved incomes for our farmers because of expanded markets. And that's actually one of the benefits of increased free trade is that we get to have more opportunities for our sellers. More markets means more opportunities. And of course, it also depends on how the opening up to trade is being managed. Because, for example, if we open up to trade, but yet the infrastructure and the supports to the sectors are not there, then these sectors might not actually be ready and prepared to accept the increase in demand. So, in other words, in order for these benefits to be felt by the farmers, by the small and medium enterprises, the ordinary worker, the management is there, the infrastructure should be there so that they are prepared once this surge of demand comes in. Now, of course, if managed well, this would lead to, for one, stable prices for farmers. Of course, rural folk will benefit. So the workers in rural areas, farmers in particular, and of course, since food processing is also part of this story, we might actually see increased employment in food processing sector. So, which means that definitely this free trade agreement will have an impact on prices and incomes of the sectors that will be directly affected. However, the extent and magnitude of these effects would depend on, as I've said earlier, how ready the sectors are, and also how this free trade will be managed down the road.
And of course, this free trade agreement also opens opportunities for other services such as IT, BPM, healthcare, construction, and professional services. How important is this agreement or this SEPA for employment and income growth in the Philippines, particularly in the said sectors?
Mm-mm. This is one of the most important parts of the agreement. You see, services employ millions of Filipinos, and this sector offers high value jobs. So if you look at value added, it's usually the services sector that has the higher value added, which means that if value added is high, the incomes that you earn out of these sectors are also high because of the high value added. So which means that services liberalization definitely would be impacted, right? So it would result, for instance, in better paying employment. Why? Because now there's more opportunities, skill upgrading for our own workers, and what's more important to this is the reduced dependence on overseas deployments. Because you see, in the Philippines, we rely on exporting our labor. Now, if these industries open up opportunities within the Philippines, for example, as a result of this free trade agreement, what ends up happening is that instead of our people going overseas for work, these service industries are already in place in the Philippines, and they can earn and make a living within the Philippines with better incomes. That would have positive effects. But then again, these effects, in order for it to be realized, mainly depends on how well this free trade agreement is managed down the road. So, in other words, while we could see that, like a crystal ball, I could see from my crystal ball that definitely yes, there's prospect for high incomes in this sector. But then again, our economy should be ready to absorb this and the infrastructure in place to accommodate this increase or yeah, increase in opportunities within this particular sector, specifically in services.
And now, Dr. Batu, what potential could stronger ties with the UAE have on foreign direct investment inflows to the country?
So FTAs is usually a pathway towards increase in foreign direct investment or FDIs. Because when an economy is restrictive, so for example, there are many barriers in place, investors or foreign investors are reluctant to invest in countries where there are many of these barriers in place. Now, if you remove these barriers, then it creates an incentive for foreign investors to try and see whether or not if you invest in the Philippines, it would be profitable for them. So you see, what these free trade agreement does is that it reduces uncertainty and uncertainty in the context of the barriers are in place. We don't know for how long these barriers are going to be there. But if you remove the barriers, uncertainty is gone. So, and of course, we know for a fact that investors, they like stable policies. They value rules, stability, they value access to markets. So, which means that the CEPA makes our country more attractive for foreign investments. So, how? We have what we call greenfield investments. So the Philippines can become attractive for these sorts of investments, like setting up a production base. For example, like a UAE-based company can come to the Philippines and set up a production base. Or if that company, for example, produces goods and services um, that are exported to other ASEAN countries, then definitely they can create a regional hub. Okay, so that can also happen. So, and which makes our country some sort of like a gateway for other ASEAN countries. Okay, so and the benefits of FDIs in this context is that it can lead to more long-term productivity investments. Because you see, if other investors see that, oh, we're investing also in the Philippines, that creates a network effect within other investors. So that will have some cascading effects on other foreign direct investment. So you see, once we start opening up our country to improve trading relations, particularly with the UAE, this will definitely open up many doors, many opportunities for us, and that includes enhanced foreign direct investment. You see, we really need, as a country, a lot of these FDIs because within the Philippines itself, it's the economy cannot sufficiently create the physical capital that the economy needs. That's why we want more foreign direct investment. And this free trade agreement does the job of opening up our economy for more FDIs to come in. And of course, we know that over the long term, we would all benefit from that.
Meanwhile, are there any risk or adjustment challenges that Philippine industries might face under this agreement, especially small local producers competing with UAE imports?
So you see, there are challenges. So as I've said moments ago, that if the infrastructures are not in place, then even if you have these free trade agreements, we might not be able to realize the full potential benefit of this free trade agreement. So in other words, there has to be things in place. So for instance, part of infrastructure is not just the physical infrastructure, but also institutions. So for instance, how good are we in terms of approving new investments? Okay, how is the red tape situation in terms of approvals for foreign direct investments? Now we have potentially these FDIs that are coming in from the UAE. So how good is our policy structure to entice foreign investors to invest into the country? So that's part of the story. But then there's also the physical infrastructure. So for example, if we were to open up certain locations within the Philippines for the construction of facilities for these foreign investors, are the infrastructures in place? So there's an infrastructure story. But then there's also the support for businesses, because you see, as what you were alluding to earlier, when small businesses start to compete with much efficient foreign firms, could they compete? Are they even ready? So, do they have the sufficient economies of scale to efficiently compete with foreign with the imports? So, in other words, we also have to prepare our own domestic economy to absorb this. Okay, so there is a risk, right? So, in other words, while we're opening up our economy, we should be able to put in place policies and programs that can actually help our MSMEs to compete, but also, of course, provide the support for foreign investment to come in the form of policy changes and also in improvements in our infrastructure.
And how does this agreement between the Philippines and UAE complement existing free trade agreements with countries like Japan, South Korea, or even, since we already mentioned earlier, ASEAN partners and RCEP in terms of economic diversification?
Well, it diversifies risk, and this free trade agreement is actually in line with the trend right now in terms of opening up economies, right? So we do have there are existing FTAs in other countries. So this is part of this trend of opening up economies. And of course, the benefit of this is that, as complementary to the other FTAs, it further diversifies the risk, right? So, for example, instead of us relying only on a few trading partners, right, like the United States, you have China, and of course, there's the ASEAN. By diversifying our trading relations, we would insulate the country insofar as external economic shocks are concerned. Because you see, the benefits of these new free trade agreements is it further enhances diversification. And by diversification, we would be able to spread out geopolitical and global headwinds. So, because you see, just imagine if you have an economy that is overly reliant on one, like the United States, or for example, China, whatever shocks that are happening within those countries, we would be directly affected. Now, if we have these other regions where we could trade with, oh, that for sure would improve the way we manage global risks insofar as our trading relations are concerned, Stephanie.
And could this agreement help reduce the Philippines' dependence on traditional export markets? And why is that important for economic resilience?
You see, by reducing your reliance on traditional markets, you get to insure the economy. You see, diversification in trade acts like an insurance. So if something happens in let's say one part of the world, so let's say something happens in Venezuela, something happens in the Middle East, in Israel, something happens in China and Taiwan, with us having a free trade agreement elsewhere, for example, within the Middle East, then that creates a cushion for us, right? To cushion ourselves in terms of these shocks. And by the way, let me also add here that while we open up our trade with UAE, this could also create opportunities for opening up our trade much more with the neighbors of UAE. So there's a thing we call like a spillover effect. So this free trade agreement with the UAE, I won't be surprised if in the coming months, or probably years, we might actually have another FTA with one of the neighbors. I won't be surprised because there are spillover effects. Now, of course, if we have more countries in our basket, so to speak, if we have more countries that we trade with, that would insulate us, that would insure us, so that if there's a shock that's happened in some parts of the world, We have sufficient insurance. We have sufficient countries that we can fall back to when we do our trade.
And from a macroeconomic perspective, how might this agreement between the Philippines and UAE affect our GDP growth, balance of trade, and long term competitiveness?
So you see, when exports improve, that has a direct impact on our GDP because exports, if you increase that, that has a positive effect on domestic production. So an increase in export demand would mean it would translate to better economic growth. So hopefully it does contribute because right now, while we are one of the fastest countries in the world, but I think in my view, our GDP growth could be actually much better, much more than what we have right now. So policies like this, opening up our country to trade, improve trade relations, definitely has a direct impact on GDP growth, and that would lead to increase in export performance, like an improvement of our exports, which could strengthen our competitiveness, which could have an impact on the stability uh, of the peso. Of course, on a macro level too, this would create employment because you see, if there is an increase in export demand, there will be an increase in employment in sectors that are directly affected by it, but also indirectly on other supporting sectors. So there would be aggregate impacts that the country will feel insofar as employment is concerned. So we would expect to see an increase in employment. Now, as the economy starts to produce more to satisfy export demand, we might actually see lowering of prices. Why? Because increase in production, in theory, actually could lead to lower prices. So if we were able to produce sufficiently as a result of this increase in export demand, and by the way, the kind of increase in production that I'm talking about here cannot be just driven by one country alone. So in other words, what I'm thinking more is that, let's say this free trade agreement has spilled over to other countries and other countries have started to have also our FTAs with us, that would have dramatic, large impacts on our production in a positive way that would lead to better growth and economic outcomes for our country.
And before I let you go, Dr. Batu, what indicators should the public and even policymakers watch in the coming years to measure whether this Philippines UAE trade deal is truly successful?
So there are several performance indicators to watch out for. So what I have in mind for one that directly would be the export growth. So we should watch out for the export growth to the United Arab Emirates and possibly to the region. Another indicator that we should watch out for would be the number of firms or businesses that are exporting, especially with particular focus on micro, small, and medium enterprises, MSMEs. We have to look carefully in terms of whether or not there's an increase in the number of these small businesses because these are drivers of our economy. We want them to increase in number. So we should watch out for that. As well as we need to look at inflows of foreign direct investment that's coming from that part of the world. Because you see, we know that whether or not this FTA is working for us, if these indicators are showing that, yes, the FTA has led to an increase in exports, of course, leading to export growth, an increase in the number of firms that are employing, and of course, employment is in there as well. Increases in services export revenues for the services sector, increase in FDI inflows, job creation. I mean, success is not just higher trade numbers, my friends, but also broader participation. So it's not just trade that we're looking at here, but the cascading effects on employment, on revenues, on foreign direct investment. So these are the indicators that we have to watch out for.
And with that, thank you so much again, Dr. Batu, for joining us here in the program Front and Center. Until next time, mabuhay po kayo.
Well, thanks for having me, Steph. Mabuhay po kayo at mabuhay po ang Pilipinas.
And we were just joined by Filipino-Canadian economist Dr. Michael Batu. At this point, we'll be ending today's edition of Front and Center. We would first like to thank our technical staff composed of Milo Jonella, Susan Aison, Hiro Lucero, and Justin Osias, who made this program possible. Thank you as well to our station manager here in Radyo Pilipinas World Service, Mr. Ray Sampang. Stay tuned on Radyo Pilipinas World Service for more updates. And as mentioned earlier, we're back on shortwave radio. Front and Center is part of our English service, which airs from 10 o'clock to 11:30 in the morning. That's Philippine Standard Time. You may listen to us via the following shortwave frequencies: 12.020 MHz, 15.640 MHz, and 17.665 MHz. Until the next episode of our program, on behalf of Jerome Toledo, this has been your host for today, Steph Vicente. Good day and stay safe, everyone.
You have just heard and watched Front and Center. Front and Center. Join us again for another edition here on Radyo Pilipinas World Service. Front and Center.